G'day viewers. Well, for part 2 on martial blows, we're going to take a little sidestep and look a little bit more closely at, first of all, pushing cuts, okay? Just because they work differently with different sorts of swords, and it's an interesting thing to have a brief look at. What happens if I leave impetus out? What if I'm nicely, solidly structured, but I simply push or pull the sword across the target in order to get a drawing cut? Okay, now, obviously a sharp sword against a sensitive bit of the body such as somebody's neck, you are definitely going to cut them. But assuming that you're doing it against a more robust bit of the body such as the chest or the arm, okay, that's going to be wearing clothing of some sort, if not sort of gambesini padding. How much damage can I actually do with that? So there we have a pull cut and a push cut. Let's see if we hurt our target at all. So the drawing cut, barely scratched one layer. The push cut, equally barely scratched one layer. So, remarkably crappy, remarkably ineffective against anything but the most sensitive of bare skin. Now the reason why is fairly obviously mechanical. Without impetus, all I've got to penetrate this target is my structure, okay? But because I have this long lever, it's almost impossible to push any sort of energy into that, okay? It's very hard to penetrate whatever it is that they are wearing. Now, as a matter of interest, the efficacy of these cuts varies considerably depending on the type of sword and how you hold it. So, for example, let's go Renaissance. Stick my finger over the crossguard like that. Now what this does, apart from bringing that point further down into line, actually gives me a second point of leverage. I am now able to, instead of really just having the palm of my hand to push with, now I've got my finger under that cross and I can use this cross to push with as well, which means I can impart a little bit more force into the target. So I shall do, I say, another push cut and compare the results. Let's have a look. So in this case, with my Renaissance-y grip, I actually got through the tatami mat to the depth of 2 layers, which is about as good as I did with the unsupported cut. So that was actually a little bit better. And the reason being that second point of leverage allows me to push a little bit harder. Now, what happens if I have not a straight sword, a curved sword? So this is a 1796 style. I believe this is a German copy of a 1796, but a reasonably deeply curved military saber. What happens if I attempt to do a push cut with this? Let's have a look. So that was this one here. It was quite a unresisting and neat little cut, and I got in, let's have a look, reasonably deep, 1, 2, 3 or 4 layers of tatami mat. So that's actually a reasonably deep gash, that one. So the reason the saber is better at that than the straight sword is because of its shape, okay? So I may impact my target there with the point in line with my arm, but as I push, I've got this deep belly hanging down that I can then push through the target and get a much deeper gash. Now, without impetus, it's still hardly particularly deep or disabling, but it means that giving impetus, that kind of a throw with a curved sword is going to be vastly more effective than it is with a straight sword. What happens if I do the same pushy cut, but this time with a second hand on the sword? So I'm not even going to swap swords to a long sword yet. I'm just going to hold the pommel there. Okay? As soon as I get this second hand on, I again have that second point of leverage, which allows me to impart a lot more force into the target as I deliver the cut. So let's see how that compares. Hello, pussycat. So I can tell you already that felt vastly more powerful. So with the two-handed sword, I got through, again, 3-ish layers of mat there. So, not devastating, but about the same as I achieved with the sabre, and much better than with the single-handed hammer grip sword. So all those cuts without impetus were all relatively weak, really, okay? None of them achieved particularly great penetration. The curved sword was the best, but even then it was, maybe half a centimetre at most, just because of the belly of that sword pressing through. So impetus is obviously really, really important. Just as structure is really, really important. And just because I know someone's going to ask, I'm going to do a quick impetus plus push cut comparison between a straight sword, a curved sword, and a two-handed sword to see what difference actually throwing it as a proper cut makes. So, with a single-handed sword, delivering my attack as a push rather than a pull. So that was a reasonably good cut, and I got through. I got through about that much. So I got through between a half and 1 centimetre, I guess. So I got half a dozen layers of tatami mat cut through there. So not as good as a drawing cut, obviously, but a whole lot better than just a placement cut. I'll do the longsword next because it came second in our previous experiment. So let's see how I do throwing the same cut, but this time pushing rather than drawing through as I would with a normal cut. So that one penetrated yay much. So maybe 1.5 centimetres. So a little bit deeper than the first one. I'm going to do the sabre cut in 2 ways. First of all, the way a 19th century Western soldier would have delivered it, extending the sword out to what we would recognise as long point. So that one is that one there, and penetration of that is about 1 centimetre, maybe a little bit more. So better than the single-handed sword, but not quite as good as the long sword. So there you are. And finally, I'm going to do the same cut, but this time I'm going to hold this sword as an Indian warrior in the 19th century would have held a tulwar. That is, with a very tight, straight wrist and up and down movement. So rather than extending the wrist and extending a thumb along there to throw the sword out, keeping the sword like so. And I'm going to do this simply because historical accounts tell us that tulwars were used for deep pushing cuts, and this is the only grip that you can use a tulwar in. So I'm just curious to see how that affects the efficacy of the cut. So let's give it a go. So that one there is the tulwar grip cut. It's much, much longer than the others, and is, there we are. So it is about 2 centimetres, so about twice as deep as I got with the, if you like, Western sabre grip. So there you are, a push cut delivered with a stiff wrist, upright tulwar style grip is going to be more powerful than one delivered in an extended Western grip. And I think that's fairly obvious. If you pick one up and try that, you can feel that yes, you can push better with that. That has some implications for, say, Viking swords held in a similar straight wrist grip, if you look at my recent Viking sword video. So maybe these sorts of push cuts would have been useful for Viking warriors as well. That said, it's never going to be as powerful as a good downright blow.